beautiful friends and fellow word lovers. Welcome back to Pocket of Poetry. My name is Olivia. Today's video is going to be just a little bit different from videos that I have done in the past. I'm honestly just a little bit nervous right now because I've never done a video like this and I don't know if anyone is gonna want to watch it or care, but I felt like making it, so here we are. Also, I apologize for the deep shadows. I'm filming this, it's getting dark as I'm filming, the sun's kind of setting, and I don't know, today's the first day of fall. I'm wearing a sweater and I don't know, I kind of wanted the cozy vibes. It feels a little cozy, feels a little like we're sitting telling stories around the fire or something, I don't know. But yeah, without further ado, I'm going to get into the video. So today's video, I'm going to be talking about a book. That book is this book right here. Hopefully there's not like a huge glare. Yes. It's called Ariana, The Making of a Queen, and it is by Rachel Ann Nunes, I think is how you say her last name. This is a book, this is LDS fiction. It was was published in 1996, so it's pretty old. As you can probably tell by the cover itself, which by the way, I just love this cover, it's amazing. And I originally picked this book up because I actually wanted to make a video kind of like making fun of this book and roasting it a little bit. I thought it would be fun. I know I did that video on the orchard back earlier this summer, and I wanted to do something kind of similar with this book. But then when I actually sat down to read it, I felt like I needed to make a different kind of video because I didn't want to roast this book. I actually really think that this book is great in a lot of ways. I think that it touches on a lot of really important topics, and the overall message of the story is one of redemption and of Christ's love that I think is very beautiful. However, I do still have problems with this book. And the reason that I picked it up in the first place is because I read it back when I was 15, and I just remember thinking it was really cheesy, and like I remember liking it, but I definitely thought it was pretty cheesy at the time. Anyway, so I do have some issues with this book, and that is what I'm going to be talking about today. Before I jump too fully into that though, I do just want to say I haven't really talked much about religion on this channel. Because religion has been something that I've just not been very comfortable talking about at all, let alone on the internet. For the past couple of years, I've definitely been going through what I term as faith deconstruction. So I was raised religious, I was raised in the LDS church, and I have over time, over the past couple of years, especially the past year, really learned to like break down what I believe and put aside the parts of my faith that I was taught that I don't necessarily ascribe to or believe in anymore, and pick up the parts that I do and take stock of what's most important to me when it comes to my beliefs and my morals and just kind of the compass by which I live my life. And one of the things that I'm super passionate about is reform within religion, and I follow a lot of like progressive Christians and progressive Mormons, and I just resonate really deeply with that side of things. I am still a deeply spiritual and religious person, but I'm not a huge fan of some of the things that religion has perpetuated over time, as I'm sure many of you will agree. So I do feel very strongly about advocating for reform and having open, honest, nuanced conversations about different topics that relate to religion, and just having discussions, being open-minded, and raising awareness on certain topics. So that is the reason that I'm making today's video. I wanted to talk about this book because while I think this book had a lot of potential and genuinely is just a very beautiful story. Like the story in and of itself is very good. It's just the way that it was executed that I have a problem with. And I feel like by talking about 3 of the characters in this book, I will explain to you how this book perpetuates the epitome of what's wrong with Christian religious culture. Okay, so that being said, if you're still here, I'm impressed. Thanks for sticking around. Again, I don't know who actually will watch this video, but I had fun researching and analyzing things for this video. So I'm gonna just quickly and briefly summarize the plot of Ariana, the Making of a Queen. Again, this book was written in the 90s, so let's just keep that in mind. So we start out with Ariana. She is a young 18-year-old girl who literally is standing alone in a hotel on her wedding night. She's just been married to a guy named Jacques, who has gone out drinking with his friends to celebrate and left his pregnant wife alone in a hotel room. They're on a hotel balcony in Paris, which is where she lives. She is reminiscing back on what brought her to this point in her life. So she remembers how her brother Antoine was killed just 9 months before. She had a twin brother. She was so close with him. They were best friends. They did everything together. And one day Antoine is hit by a car on his way to school and passes away. And so the event of her brother's death sort of begins her on this trajectory in life. She runs into this girl at school named Paulette, who's very into like drinking and drugs, and so she kind of joins up with Paulette's friend group and starts getting into a lot of the same stuff that she's into. That's where she meets Jacques, the guy that she ends up marrying. The two of them have this sort of whirlwind romance. He's so handsome and charming, and she ends up getting pregnant. So then she's like, hey, I want to get married, and so he marries her. So that's kind of where we're at right now with Ariana. She has a strained relationship with her parents because after her brother's death, they sort of pushed her away, and Jacques ends up coming back. Fast forward a little bit. So Ariana and Jacques, they find an apartment. They start their lives together. Jacques has a job, but he eventually gets fired for doing drugs, and so he's out of job. Ariana ends up getting a job at a cafe. The manager's name is Marguerite, and she kind of takes Ariana in and adopts her in a way, and like supports her in a lot of ways, buys a crib for the baby to like be in the back when it's born and stuff. Anyways, during the whole pregnancy, Jacques is very erratic. He gets fired from jobs and isn't really able to hold down a job, and he's very much into like drinking and drugs. He has parties over at their apartment all the time. And Ariana, ever since she got pregnant, she's like, no more drinking, no more drugs. Like, I want to do right by my baby. And honestly, like, props to her. She's just really taking this pregnancy as a way to change her life. So she ends up giving birth to a sweet baby girl who she names Antoinette. They call her Net for short. And for a while, Ariana's just blissfully happy because she loves her baby girl so much. And I have to say, Ariana and Net are like my two favorite characters. Net is just like a sweet, adorable baby, and I'm a hoe for baby content, so I just love her. She's so cute. Shortly after the baby is born, Jacques kind of turns around. He kind of starts acting differently, and he gets a job, all this stuff. One night he asks Ariana, hey, can I have a party to celebrate the birth of our new baby? And she's stressed about him having a party because she doesn't want drugs and stuff like that around her baby. But she ends up reluctantly agreeing on the condition that like no one smokes in the apartment. But basically, as she could have predicted, things get out of hand, and while Ariana is out of the room and the baby is lying on the bed, there's like a couple in there, and they're like so drunk that they don't even notice that there's a literal baby on the bed. And so Ariana just freaks out. She grabs the baby, she leaves, she goes to Marguerite's house. She gets in this dangerous situation. Basically, it's just really bad, and she tells Jacques, you know what, like, we're done, this isn't working, I can't have my baby around this environment. So they split up. She moves into the apartment with Marguerite, and her husband Jules lives above them. So then anyway, time passes. She decides to go back to school. Life's looking up. Things are going good for her. Work is good. School is good. Her baby's adorable. And then Jacques comes back into her life. And when he comes back into her life, he's begging her to like give him another chance. He really wants to be part of her life and their daughter's life. And he's just really trying to change his ways. But Ariana is a bit naive because Jacques is coming around wearing dark sunglasses. He suddenly has all this money that she doesn't know where it came from. I mean, it's not hard to figure out what he's been involved in, but she, I think, is probably just blinded by the fact that she just really wants it to work out. She wants to have a real family, so she kind of slowly, reluctantly starts to trust him again. And one day she goes to take a test for school, and when she comes back to pick up her baby from the neighbor who was watching her, the neighbor says, oh, your husband came by and took the baby a while ago. And so Ariana starts freaking out. She goes back to the apartment. Her friend Paulette is sitting there by herself. And she goes, Paulette, like, where's the baby? Where's Jock? And she says, I'm so sorry, Ariana. Your baby is dead. And this part is so tragic. Like, oh my gosh. My jaw dropped when I read this part because I didn't, like, I knew that the baby died. I remembered that about the book, but I didn't remember how she died, and how the way that she dies is so dark and tragic. Basically, Jacques was hanging out with his friends, had the baby, was super drugged up. Baby wouldn't stop crying because she was teething, so he ends up giving her literal heroin. He gives a baby heroin. So yeah, the baby dies. It's horrible, and Ariana runs to the hospital. She sees Jacques there with police waiting to pick him up, and she yells at him and tells him she hopes he rots in hell. She's just absolutely broken. She's grieving. She's so sad. So some time passes. Ariana's really in a dark place. Ends up running into this old friend of hers who ends up trying to introduce her to the LDS church. And at this point, Ariana has had several run-ins with LDS missionaries. She's had experiences where she's seen them on the street and they've tried to talk to her, and she's been like, no, I don't want anything to do with this. But there have been multiple instances, and those instances have kind of stuck with her. There was this one missionary that she ran into shortly after her brother's funeral, who was kind of stuck with her, and then turns out that same missionary ends up coming to see her with her friend. So anyway, she ends up agreeing to listen to the missionaries, and she ends up, long story short, getting converted to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. She gets baptized. All these different things happen in her life, and things are starting to sort of look up for her. She's still really sad and grieving, but she starts working for like the Anti-Drug Coalition, and she does a commercial for them talking about her experience. And then she meets this guy named Jean-Marc, who is a missionary, and she's really involved in church, and she's always like going on splits with the missionaries, doing different church things. And she ends up meeting this guy Jean-Marc, and they have this like really special connection, and he's like the love interest guy or whatever that ends up coming into her life. And I'm just gonna say this right now, I hate Jean-Marc. He's like my least favorite character in the entire book. He's a total creep. He keeps a poster of Ariana from the anti-drug commercial and carries it around with him everywhere, like a full poster, not just like a little picture of her, like a poster. He's just kind of gives me creepy, weird vibes, and I don't love him. But the whole book, Ariana's like talking about how special he is and how wonderful he is. So Jean-Marc kind of convinces her to go on a mission herself. He's like, you would be a great missionary. She's like, really, you think so? And he's like, yeah. So she decides to go on a mission, and then right before she goes on her mission, she goes to her parents and she kind of makes up with them, and she tells them, you know what, I forgive you for everything. And they're like, oh my gosh, like, we want you back in our lives. And so she moves back in with her parents right before she leaves. She ends up going to Bordeaux, France on her mission, which is where the beloved Jean-Marc is from. And so the next little part of the book is about like her experiences on her mission. The main thing that happens is she runs into her old friend Paulette, who she hasn't seen since the old days when, you know, everything happened with her baby. And Paulette, she finds her passed out in an alleyway, clearly in a bad way, not doing well. She looks like she's been probably abused physically, and she looks like she's been doing things that are not great. So Ariana gets some people to carry her back to one of her friends' apartments, and all of her friends decide that they're going to keep Paulette with them at all times, and, you know, keep her off drugs, because she was in such a severe drug addiction that she ended up resorting to prostitution and just getting into really bad things. So Ariana, she, in her newfound like love of the gospel and her newfound happiness with, you know, the church, she decides she forgives Paulette for everything that happened in the past, and she's just like, she just loves Paulette. She wants Paulette to get better, so they're all watching over her. Meanwhile, Jean-Marc's brother Pierre kind of starts falling for Paulette. They develop this relationship, and Paulette tries to leave at one point because she's like, I don't know why you guys are being so nice to me, especially you, Ariana. Like, how can you forgive me after what I did? Because she was there when the thing happened with Net. And Ariana says, like, I love you, I forgive you, like, I've moved past all of that because I know the atonement of Jesus Christ can work in your life just as it's worked in mine. And so Paulette is like, okay, like, if you really feel that way, if you really forgive me, then maybe I can start to forgive myself. And so she kind of goes on this journey. She joins the church, gets baptized, blah, blah, blah. So then Ariana ends up going home from her mission. Right when she goes home, Jean-Marc has like a week or two left of his own mission, so he's still out, but only for a little bit. So she sees him one last time while she's there. And then there's this other girl, Aimee, that she sort of runs into that she knew from her ward before. And Aimee is described as this beautiful blonde vixen who all the men love, but she's a total B. And she has a thing for Jean Marc and totally wants him for herself, and she's super rude to Ariana. Jean Marc ends up telling Ariana, like, I'll call you when I get home or whatever, but something about him seems off, and she just can't figure out what it is. So then he goes home. She doesn't hear from him for weeks, which turn into months, and she starts to stress because she's like, oh my gosh, like, I thought we had something really special. Like, throughout her whole mission, they were writing each other. He told her about how he had feelings for her and how she was the woman he wanted to marry and all of this stuff. And she's like, what is going on? Like, I thought we had something, but he doesn't reach out to her. So then during all this time, Aimee is just being super rude to her, being like, oh, Jean-Marc probably doesn't want you because of your past. Like, why would anyone want you because of your past? And she's just like the worst. And Ariana's like really sad because she's like, okay, maybe it is because of that. And then she starts to kind of doubt herself. Anyway, she has this experience where one day she's getting off work. She now works at a bank for her dad. One day she's getting off work. She runs into this guy named Maurice, who was one of Jacques' old friends. And he's like, hey, want to get a drink with me for old time's sake? And she's like, sure, I guess. Not really, but I will. So she goes. And then she tells him, I'm not drinking alcohol. Like, I won't drink anything alcoholic. And he says, okay, whatever. So he's like drinking a beer. She's drinking hot chocolate. They're like catching up. And then at one point he hands her a cigarette. And she's like tempted for a second. Like, oh, if I just drank right now or smoked, all my problems would go away. And then right as she's holding the cigarette in her hands, Aimee, the bitch girl, looks through the window of the cafe that she's in and is like, oh my gosh, look at what you're doing. Like, I've caught you in the act. And then Ariana's like, oh my gosh, like, that was stupid. I don't even know why I was tempted. So she like gives the cigarette back to Maurice, goes out, confronts Aimee in the street. It's all dramatic. Anyway, so Ariana has this epiphany moment where she's like, I forgive myself. I know that I'm forgiven through the atonement. Like, I don't need to dwell on my past anymore. And it's actually really cool. And she just kind of like has this moment of being like, you know what? I can move past my past. And even if Jean-Marc doesn't want me, that doesn't mean I'm not worthy, and I will continue to live my life, and blah, blah, blah. And then anyway, days later, she ends up going home. Oh, and then she decides that the last person that she wants to tell the gospel to is her ex-husband, Jacques, who is in prison, literally for the murder of their child. So she goes to the prison on Christmas Day. She tells Jacques, look, I want to tell you about the church, gives him a Book of Mormon, and she's like, I forgive you for what happened, and they have this like sweet touching moment. Then she goes back home. She sees Jean-Marc sitting on her doorstep, and he's like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry that I didn't write to you or call you or anything for like 2 months. I just felt like I wasn't worthy of you. Like, that's literally his reason. Sorry, I just don't like Jean-Marc. His literal reason for not contacting her for 2 months is that he didn't think he was good enough for her because she was this amazing, strong woman who had been through so much. And he's like, oh, maybe I'm not the right one for you. Maybe I'm not the one who can really be the king to your queen. He literally says that. And I'm not that exact phrasing, but something similar. And she's like, oh my gosh, like, of course you are, like, I love you. And so then they like decide to get married. They're all so in love, and then the book ends with them getting married and having twins together. So boy and a girl, just like Ariana and her brother. So we've come full circle. So that was my trying to be as quick as I possibly could summary of the book. So now I'm going to get into the problems with the book. So the story overall, it's a cool story. It's a story of redemption. It's a story of ultimate tragedy turning into ultimate like hope. The problems that I have are the following. First of all, most of the characters are extremely underdeveloped. Ariana is the main character, is really the only character who has any sort of development. I mean, the only character that I really, you know, because you're inside her head, it's told from first person, so you definitely get in her head and kind of understand her as a person. But besides her, none of the other characters really have any character development, and that is part of the problem that I have with this book. But before I go on to that, I'm going to start with Ariana's character. So there's 3 different characters that I want to talk about in this book to illustrate 3 different points of what I think the problem is. So the first character is Ariana, the second character is Paulette, and the third is Aimee. So Ariana, her problem isn't as big, but she's basically described as being a very naive and innocent girl, which makes, you know, it's fine. She can be naive and innocent, but I just found certain aspects of the narration to be very like preachy and very judgmental, when Ariana herself is like, even before she joins the church, like way before that part of the story even happens, she's literally in the middle of the drinking and drugs and all of this stuff, and she has been doing it. Like, you know, it's not like she's been like staying apart from it completely. She has been involved in this stuff, and yet she somehow is just portrayed as super naive and innocent and like pure. And I don't know, I found that to be a little bit problematic. For example, literally on page 1, the window or the music from the next door hotel room is described as being another American song idolized for irreverence and suggestiveness. And that's literally on page 1. Ariana is describing this pop music as being irreverent and suggestive, and she's literally 18 years old and has been involved in all of this stuff. And so it just didn't make sense for her character to be saying something like that about a pop song. It doesn't make sense. It's like the author is trying to slip in her agenda even in those other moments. And I feel like it would have been so much more effective if we had been able to get more into Ariana's head, into her temptations, into why she falls in with that crowd. And I feel like if we had gotten more nuance and gotten more into her head and more empathetic towards her situation, and more like, oh, like this is how she was feeling and this is why she did what she did, instead of making her sound like she's this high and mighty perfect character, even when she has been doing these things. You know, she got pregnant out of wedlock, she did drugs. And I think it's great, like don't get me wrong, I think it's great that Rachel Ann decided to include a character and represent a character that had been living this lifestyle in an LDS work. I think that is great representation. I just think that it could have improved if she had made it a little bit more empathetic towards people who actually have been in situations like that. Ariana, just, you know, I think overall she's portrayed well, but if she had been portrayed with just a little bit more nuance and compassion, and a little bit more just portraying her as a normal girl instead of someone who is judgmental and a little bit high and mighty towards others, I think that would have made it a lot more effective. So the second character that I want to talk about is Paulette. And Paulette has zero character development, okay? She literally exists as a prop to the plot. She literally exists to be Ariana's person that gets her into drugs, and to be the person that Ariana has to forgive, and it's so inspirational and great because she forgives her and all of this stuff. But we don't get any insight into Paulette's character, hardly at all. Like, we know she was into drugs, and that's it. We don't know anything about her backstory, what got her to that place in her life. We don't know anything about her personality, really. Like, does she even have one? Romance with Pierre is only just briefly mentioned, so it's not developed or gone into at all. And so I just think the author missed a really great opportunity here to have a ton of empathy and compassion and have representation of a character who's in a really dark place in their life, who's been through horrible dark things and gone to places they never thought they would go, and yet has come out and been redeemed. And I feel like the story would have been so much more inspirational and so much more impactful had we gotten a little bit more character development from Paulette. Like, even had we had, I mean, I'm not saying she had to do this, but like, it would have been cool if we'd had dual perspectives, like part Ariana's story and part Paulette's story, and we see Paulette and what she's doing as well as what Ariana's doing, because really, we didn't need the whole story to be focused on like all the little small details of Ariana's life. We could have switched and alternated between the two of them and seen like their separate trajectories, and I feel like that would have been really cool. I feel like Rachel Ann missed out on a huge opportunity here to have a really impactful storyline with Paulette, but instead she kind of just used Paulette as a prop. And this is why I feel like this book perpetuates problems in religious culture, because so often that's how people who are, quote, sinners are treated and looked upon. They're looked upon as props. They're looked upon as people to be forgiven, people to be these stories that we hear in church and, you know, are touched by. And there's nothing wrong with those stories. Absolutely not. There's nothing wrong with stories of redemption. There's nothing wrong with stories about people who come from darkness and go into light. But it's when we oversimplify them and we treat them as not real human beings with emotions and feelings and thoughts. Like, when I think it was easy for the author to just be like, oh, like, you know, I'll just write about this character, and, you know, she wants to keep it PG so she doesn't go into too much detail, but I really think she could have gone into more detail while still making it appropriate and like having good nuanced discussion around topics and having empathy and really getting into the mind of someone who's in a situation like that. So that's my second point. My third point is about Aimee. She is on the opposite end of the spectrum, and I thought it was very cool how she included a character who was on this one end of the spectrum where she's just the lowest of the low, and she works her way up. And then this other character, Aimee, who really thinks she's so high and mighty and thinks she's so much better than everyone and just like preens, but really, she has this complete hypocrisy. And I loved that. What I didn't love was how Aimee was portrayed as an absolute witch. She was portrayed as somebody who was just downright mean and aggressive and vindictive towards Ariana, okay, and in a church setting. The reason I have a problem with this is because it's not realistic. Yes, there are church members who are mean. Yes, there are church members who are judgmental. Absolutely. And I appreciate that she included that in her book. However, she did not do it in a way that was realistic or nuanced at all, which kind of makes it seem like the problem doesn't really exist, because you don't run into someone who's literally like, oh my gosh, like I will read to you, okay? I will read to you the quotes that Aimee says to Ariana. At one point, she straight up says to Ariana, and this is at church, "We both know your past is none too good, Ariana. Maybe you're not worthy of a man like John Mark." Okay? And then later on in the book, in the scene where she confronts her outside of the cafe, she literally says, "Don't the scriptures say something about a dog turning back to his vomit? Well, that's what you're doing, and I'm glad John Mark has thought to reconsider his involvement with you. What kind of wife could you possibly make him?" That's not just like casual judgmental comments, that's straight up attacking her. And I was like, okay, there are people all over the place who are members of the church, who are judgmental, who are mean, who are catty, but they don't outright come out and attack people. They to your face, they are so sweet to you. They are so nice. Backhanded compliments and like little snide comments. Like it's so much more subtle than that. It's not someone coming straight out and saying, you're like a dog returning back to its vomit, like in the scriptures. Like, no, you're not going to see anybody at church saying that to another person, but you will definitely see people implying that. You will see people giving people judgmental looks about what they're wearing. You'll see people making little comments. You'll see people giggling. You'll see people saying hurtful things in like lessons and testimony meetings. Those are the kinds of things that you see in church culture. And I feel like by portraying Aimee as this total bully, this person who's just straight up not afraid to call her out like that, we're almost saying like, oh, this is just an over-characterization. This isn't something that really happens in the church. She's just a character. But that's really not the case. And I feel like if we had made Aimee a more nuanced character and made her someone who has, this charming side that you can definitely see, like, oh, she's charming. People are taken in by her. People are fooled by her. But also she has this mean edge to her that not everybody sees. And also, at the end, Ariana and Aimee have this moment where they forgive each other, Ariana forgives her, and Aimee's like, oh, I'm so sorry, and she like calls Aimee to be like one of her counselors in the Young Women's Presidency, and it's like, okay, that's great that you forgave her, but let's give Aimee a little bit of character development. Let's give her a little bit of nuance. Like, let's get in her head a little bit. Let's explain why she did what she did and what her insecurities were. And so I really feel like at its core, this book was just a great story about redemption and religion, and what it failed in was it failed to give these two archetypes of characters, specifically Paulette and Aimee. It failed to give them depth. It failed to give them nuance. It failed to truly give us empathy for these characters. And I think empathy is the most important thing. We need more representation of people like Paulette, and we need more representation of people like Aimee in our literature, in our fiction, as we're talking about church, as we're talking about church culture, as we're trying to address problems with it. And I believe that if the author had, maybe gone about this in a slightly different way, this book could have been so impactful, could have been something that challenged stereotypes, pushed boundaries, caused people to think outside of themselves and think outside of the box. And so, Rachel Ann, if you ever watch this video, just know I'm not hating on your book. I think your story is great, I just think that we all can benefit from a little bit more compassion, a little bit more putting ourselves in other people's shoes, especially in the church. So that is the end of my video. I have no idea. Let me know in the comments what you thought. I love talking about topics like this. I'm so passionate about reform within religious communities of all kinds. So I just love talking about it. So anyways, thanks for watching. Leave this video a like if you enjoyed it, and subscribe if you are in the mood for doing that. And I will see you in the next video.